Cartoon Network often brings back a sense of childhood nostalgia whenever it is mentioned. Shows like Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Ben 10, Steven Universe, and for quite a lot of people, Regular Show. An embodiment of nostalgia, even for a first-time viewer, the unbelievable happenings of this show bring a new perspective to how two friends live their lives together and always leaves you easily entertained.
No, I am the father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Welcome back to Easily Entertained. I'm your host, Bryson Olson. Here we talk about all things entertainment. Today we are talking Regular Show, a show that aired on Cartoon Network, I believe late 2000s to 2010s. If I am not mistaken, maybe I should double check that. 2010 is when it first aired. That makes sense. But yeah, Regular Show. It's about a pair of guys, Mordecai and Rigby. Mordecai's a blue jay, Rigby's a raccoon. Just two guys, just two bros being bros, and kind of the ridiculous occurrences that happen while they work at their job, which is at a park. The show kind of focuses around a bunch of other characters as well, like Skips, Benson, High Five Ghost, Muscle Man, Pops. There are several other characters, but Mordecai and Rigby are the main focus of the entire show. A lot of people were watching this when I was growing up during like my middle school and high school time, but I never really saw a lot of it. I saw occasionally glimpses of it just because we didn't have cable very often. So if I saw it, it was usually because I was at someone else's house, or it was the brief time that we had cable and I would catch a glimpse of it. But it just wasn't always a show that I actually got to sit down and watch until recently, because Regular Show is on Max, formerly HBO Max, and I finally got around to watching it, kind of with a bit of help from my roommate Cormac, because he did grow up watching it and he loved it, and then also a bit of help from TikTok, because for a while I was getting a ton of clips from the show. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to watch the show, and I'm still not done all the way. I've only watched like 5 seasons, I think. I'm about most of the way through season 5, but I thought it'd be fun to talk about it. And so since it's my first time, I think we should talk about that, especially because I don't feel the same nostalgia for it. I have a different perspective when watching the show, but I can see where all the nostalgia is coming from, and I still weirdly feel a bit of it. And I think primarily for that is just because although I didn't watch Regular Show, I did watch some shows that were in that era of Cartoon Network. I occasionally watched Adventure Time or Ben 10, and like those were the primary ones that I would see, or Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, and those were all in the same realm and almost a similar style to Regular Show. And so I still feel this kind of weird nostalgia, even though I didn't watch the show growing up and it's only my first time viewing it. And I think part of a reason for that, despite just other shows at the same time having aired, I think it's also just because of its target audience was definitely for teenagers. A lot of shows, they're meant for a younger audience or like the preteens. This show was meant for teenagers, for a more adult audience. It's not like super crass or anything like Family Guy or Simpsons is, but it is definitely meant to target more of a mature standpoint. It's the main characters are two college guys, essentially. Well, they're college age, but like dropped out or never went to college. But so that kind of lets me as an adult who is in college kind of relate a bit more, because I'm closer in age to the main characters and they act a lot like people my age act. And so it's really interesting to still feel that kind of connection with it, despite not having watched the show before. And because of that connection, it's also propelled me to continue watching it, because I'm getting that feeling of future nostalgia, essentially, that I still want to keep watching it because it feels familiar. And I like when a show can do that. And I think especially with this show, each episode is very self-contained. So you don't have a lot of plots that take up more than a single episode. Because typically when that happens in shows, which is very common nowadays, which is great. I love the bigger overarching stories, but sometimes when you have that happen, you have to watch whatever is before. Regular show is a show that is all self-contained in its episodes that you can kind of just hop in at any random point and still understand what is going on. And I think from a new perspective, I can kind of hop in anywhere. And although I didn't watch it before, I understand the basic plot that is happening. I don't understand all the character connections yet. I mean, I do now, but when I first started watching, I didn't understand all the connections yet. But because each episode is self-contained, it's easy to pick up on those connections, because you can't always have a show like that. Think Stranger Things, Arcane, Peaky Blinders. You don't always have these self-contained episodes where you can kind of just pay attention regardless. Like sometimes you can pick up on a little bit, but for the most part, you are hoping to watch with someone else that has seen it so you can ask them questions about what has happened previously. But this kind of show where it's, I wouldn't exactly say anthological, because like it's not really like a vast story. Like some of them, like they're continuous, but they just are all self-contained. You can watch each episode without really needing to have been like, oh, I should have watched the previous episodes. There are a couple situations that do kind of that, though, where you do want to watch the previous episodes, and that's mainly when you're dealing with specific relationships of different characters. And specifically Mordecai and Rigby, they have friend relationships and romantic relationships that you have to kind of understand what is happening in them. So like getting broken up with or an assumed cheating situation, these kind of things you do need to still witness. Like you can pick up on it later, but you're going to be missing context if you don't see those previous episodes. But that is not a majority of the show. It is still mostly all self-contained episodes. And if you're a new time viewer of regular show, you will probably feel a very similar way. Everything feels self-contained, and it doesn't feel confusing if you miss an episode. Like someone, like you're binge watching it with someone, if they continue to binge watch it, you don't feel like you have to go back. You still understand for the most part where everything is going, if that makes any sense. So for like the new viewers, I think that's a great way to target a much larger audience, because anyone can pick up on it at any point, and you don't have to be worried about seeing all this stuff before it. And I think in the modern world, where a lot of things are being like franchised, like Marvel or Star Wars, you feel like you have to watch all these products, but they're not, like they're all, and you feel like they're all necessary. That isn't the case with regular show, and I think that's why it has that charm and why you can get that sort of nostalgia feeling, because that's how a lot of shows used to be made, is in that self-contained format. And some still are, but for the most part, that's how they all used to be, because making a show with a long drawn-out story, although impressive and a good idea, that's a lot of effort to put in to a show, especially an animated show that you don't know for sure is gonna be doing well. And so especially in the early seasons, you don't want to be investing that much into a huge drawn out storyline until you know exactly where it's going to go. And I think that's why it's so good for a first-time series, a first-time viewer series, because everything is kind of sectioned out like that. And kind of on top of it, every episode is kind of crazy, which is so kind of fun about this show. It's kind of adding on to its little charm, is that each episode is always some crazy shenanigans. And for the most part, a lot of the show is pretty normal, I would say. I feel like most like interactions are fairly normal, but what actually happens in the world is not always normal. Things like laser discs coming to life and like forming guardians, or 8-track tapes with like the same plot points, or you have characters like death reoccurring several times, or you have monsters or immortal characters. Even like one of the supporting characters, Skips, he is basically immortal. And so you kind of get all these crazy things happening, and it's this almost self-contained madness is how I would describe it. And I think for a self-contained show, that is a genius way to do it. Because if you're going to have a bunch of crazy things happening, you need to establish that that's just how the show is. And so having a bunch of these different episodes that are all kind of a little bit crazy, and crazy things happen in each episode, that's just the norm. And that's what you start to assume about the show. And so that means you can jump in at any random point, and some crazy thing can be happening on your screen, like someone's trying to join a business where you're just lifting with your back. Terrible idea. But that's like a plot point that only fits this kind of show, because they've established they're just whatever. Every episode is that kind of self-contained madness and insanity where they are like, well, we can just kind of do whatever we want. And so there have been several times where I'm watching the show and I feel like this sense of like a whiplash where my brain is like tuning back in. Like typically it's kind of one of those shows where I can sort of tune myself out a little bit and like play a game on my Switch or look at my phone and not give a huge amount of my brain function to pay attention to the show. But every once in a while, there's something super insane that happens that just makes my brain go, what? And that is, I think, a fun reaction that you want to get from your audience. And clearly the creators of the show understood that. And that's why they have all these kind of crazy moments. And you kind of get desensitized to it a little bit. But then every once in a while, they pull you back in and they're like, let's make it really weird and have them question everything about the show again. And I really like that they do that. And sometimes you have that with like reoccurring characters, like reoccurring plot lines, and it allows you to have this like organized mess. If you ever walk into someone's room of like, usually if they have like ADHD or something, usually it's chaotic. Usually there's kind of everything that is seemingly in no order, but that's not the case. To you, it's out of order, but to that person, it is in order. It's an organized mess. And I think that's kind of a good way to describe a lot of the plot and episodes of regular show is just an organized mess. It's kind of just, let's just throw this in to see whatever the heck we want and see how it plays out. And I think that's a fun way to make a show, because you don't have to worry about these big plot lines with very specific motives for your characters. And like each character is like obviously still their own personality, but you're not worried about trying to fit everything together in a very harmonious way that typical stories have to do. And you can kind of just do whatever. And I think that's a good way to make this kind of show, is just, hey, let's do whatever and have it be a collective acceptance by the audience and the creators that anything can really happen in the show. And I think that makes things really fun, and I really like that. but kind of on top of talking about characters still being a little bit wacky as well. That's something that this show, I think, does incredibly well, especially with its two main characters, Mordecai and Rigby. They are the bros. You see the world of this, you see their world through the eyes of them. You get to go throughout all these crazy shenanigans with Mordecai and Rigby. It's very rare that it's focused on anyone else but those two characters. And even if it is focused on someone else, they are always involved. But it's really that dynamic of two guy friends. And it goes even deeper than them just being like, oh, super goofy and everything. It tackles a lot more of what guy emotions are like. And I've seen like the analytics on like the YouTube now, and we have more of a larger female audience, but typically with guys, we express feelings a little bit differently, and it's not always in like a bad way. It's just a difference way, and it's just the way we've been taught or how society has taught us, and that things are kind of starting to break down nowadays, of course. But this show really emphasizes what it's like to kind of be a guy, and how, especially like a young adult guy, and how you express your emotions. And so a lot of it is obviously like some goofy moments together where they're kind of just cracking jokes and being idiots together. And that's what all guys do. No matter the age, a guy is going to be an idiot and make some stupid joke. Usually that's funny to another guy and sometimes funny to other people. But they also have things like getting annoyed at each other, but getting over it. Like, you can obviously have friends where you're like, oh my gosh, dude, like, shut up. But you eventually get over it. And it's not like an argument type thing. It's like, yeah, you're just kind of annoying sometimes, but that's okay. You're still my friend, even despite being annoying. And that's just how guys express that emotion. Or along the lines of joking, you usually get almost like borderline bullying each other. And I know that's like a quirky thing that people like to say now, where it's like, my love language is bullying. Guys do it like for real sometimes, where it is very deeply personal, but you have collectively agreed, not even like verbally, you just have like subconsciously agreed that it's a joke. And that's fine. And if it really is something that hurts you, you can tell them. But for the most part, everyone knows that everything you say is a joke. And that's exactly how guys typically express their emotions. And then on the more deeper emotions, so things like romantic relationships or sadness or anger, typically, if you've ever been around a guy, we tend to be a bit more silent with those kind of more intimate feelings. And that's not because we are trying to bottle it up. Part of it is because that's how society has taught guys to react, to kind of keep it contained and not let it get out of hand. But a lot of the times we can shut down. I try not to. I try very hard, because I think complete silence and not really getting down to the gist of the problem is very productive, because I think communication is always a great thing. But especially with guys being friends with other guys, silence speaks a lot of volumes. There's a scene in this where Mordecai gets broken up with, and he's really having a rough time, and he's sitting on the roof, and Rigby comes up and he's like, hey, you doing all right, man? Do you want to talk about it? No, that's okay. Rigby just sits down, hands him a soda, and just hangs out. It's not necessarily that we don't want to talk about it. It's just that's not how we process all the time. We have to process it first, and then we can talk about it. And especially when you're around other guys who understand that kind of feeling, it feels really cathartic. It's not that you hate, like that you don't want to talk about it, but you've both accepted this silence that you're like, okay, I just need to sit here and compile how I feel, how I think for a moment. And you just need the presence of someone who cares about you. And you don't have to be like super emotional about it. You just need to have someone next to you who gets it, who understands that you're going through something and that you have these feelings and you're working through it, but you don't want to talk about it right now. And that's a very important way for guys to express their feelings. So like typically people talk about like the strong silent type. It's not that they are trying to be silent and bottle up their emotions. It's because that's how they process them. They process them themselves first and then share them with others. And I think that's something that a lot of guys can relate to and a lot of young guys can really relate to as you're going through life and don't really know what you're doing yet. Granted, you kind of end up where you never really know, but you sort of have more of a direction that you know. But when you're younger, you don't have that direction yet. And so you're still having to process how you deal with everything. And so this show really shows that you can just be a bro being a bro. That's how you can process your emotions. And maybe that was like a very convoluted way of saying it, but that is how it is. And guys really understand. And for women who don't always know that that's how guys process things, that is how a lot of guys process things. It's not always the healthiest manner. I think there should still be a talking phase to that, but a lot of that initial emotion, instead of being brought out, usually is contained for a moment to let you process things so that we don't go off the rails or things like that. Like you don't want to be seen as aggressive. You just need to know what you want to say before you're going to say it. And that's typically how guys tend to process emotions. You think about it and then it starts to hit you a lot more. It's almost like, I wouldn't necessarily say a denial phase, but you're kind of just wallowing in it for a moment. You just have to get there. It's a buffer where you're loading your emotion. You're downloading it and then you will open it. And I just think that's a very interesting way to showcase what it's like being friends with other guys. And I like that this show uses that a lot. And I think it's just really helpful, especially since the show is definitely targeted towards a more younger teenage boy audience. Showing how to process those kind of feelings in that kind of more healthy way is a safe bet. It's a safe idea to show that it's okay to still feel these emotions and you may feel differently to how you process them, but that's okay. You just need to have people around you who also care and know that they care to listen to your emotions. And that's what I really like about this show. It's that silence that speaks volumes, which is really wonderful. But yeah, that is my thoughts on Regular Show. But before we go, don't worry, we have our question of the week to get you invested in the discussion as well. You can answer on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you are checking out this episode. And this is going to primarily relate if you've seen Regular Show or at least know a little bit about it. And that would be, which character are you in Regular Show? Typically, you try to associate yourself with a specific character, and I think especially for guys, like the duo dynamics, this show, you definitely will be one character or the other. For me, especially with my roommate Cormac, who's been on the show a little bit, I am definitely Mordecai, and he is certainly Rigby. And we kind of say that just because Rigby tends to be a bit more unhinged a lot of times. Sometimes together, they're both unhinged, and that's how a lot of guys are. But Mordecai tends to be a bit more, not necessarily quiet, but more reserved and specific on his reactions, whereas Rigby is a bit more unhinged and not as filtered as Mordecai is. And that's why I think I'm a lot more like Mordecai and Cormac is a lot more like Rigby. And yeah, so I want to know, which character are you in Regular Show? Let us know. We are excited to hear your answers. And with that, give us a follow on Instagram at Easily Entertained Podcast. Also, be sure to subscribe or follow on whatever platform you are listening on so you can get notified every time we have a new episode. And speaking of which, until next time, this has been Easily Entertained. Bye. You have been entertained.